Hey, everybody, and welcome to Oh My Word with Katie, the show where we hear from Christian writers and give you great book recommendations and marvel at all the ways God shows up in words and stories. I'm your host, Katie Ginn, and today I'm joined by Miss Sherye Green. I've known Sherye for over a decade. She is the author of a devotional book, 3 works of nonfiction covering everything from World War II to veteran suicide to a real-life murder mystery, and her trilogy of novels, the Timothy House Chronicles, which she just completed with the 3rd and final volume, Higher Ground. Sherye, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks, Katie. I'm delighted to be here.
And as I said that intro, I realized you're a very multifaceted person and writer because, your bio says, well, she's a former Miss Mississippi and, has had a career in business and teaching. And I met you and interviewed you a long time ago, and I just remember sitting at Beagle Bagel, and you're, smearing strawberry schmear on your bagel, and you're saying, at prep, I teach a class called Hitler's Persuasive Powers. And I was like, this is great. Because it's just, you're a very wholesome person, but you're not afraid to talk about some very dark stuff in your work, both fiction and nonfiction. So it sounds like you just like stories in general.
I do. I'm a retired history teacher. But I always, especially as a believer in Christ, think of history as his story.
Yeah.
That, not everybody sees it that way, but that he ordains the events of time and of planet. But World War II especially is a very intriguing subject to me, and it's such a vast subject.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, but you did a book with a World War II era refugee, incredible story. And like I said, talked about some very heavy topics in some of your nonfiction. But then in your fiction, I'm not going to say it's fluffy because these characters in the Timothy House Chronicles, they've gone through some stuff, but it's a little more heartwarming,
Right.
So where did your love of stories come from? Because it branches off in all sorts of different ways, but where did that start for you?
I think childhood. I have one brother, 2.5 years younger, but my mother would read to us stories at night before we, went to bed. Bible stories, fairy tales, Greek mythology, that kind of thing. Really classic literature.
Yeah.
So I developed a love early on for story and maybe an ear for it. Although with fiction, I would not say I know what I'm doing. I'm very self-taught as a writer. Anyway, but I think in childhood. And then an early book, maybe, I don't know, maybe 8 or 10 years old, Little Women by Louisa May Alcott was one of my favorites. But Jo was the character, was the sister that I identify with. I was a big tomboy growing up. Eat breakfast in the sewer behind my house and play army. In the Depression, especially between the yard and the neighbor's yard, especially when the rain filled up and we could drive our army trucks through the muddy water. That was fun.
Yeah.
Or camping outside in the treehouse that my dad built for us. But I think, her character of a strong, independent woman, but also, and that again was writing in the 1800s when you did everything by longhand. But that's my preferable way to write, is I write it first on paper and then I transcribe it. Trying to get digital where I just sit down at the computer. I'm not there yet.
Yeah, well, I mean, sometimes that helps your process. I think it triggers more of the synapses or whatever the scientific way of saying that is. All right, so Little Women. Yeah, I didn't read that till I was an adult. I'm ashamed to say it,
That's
but
all right.
it was so delightful when I finally did. So, all right, so you had a couple of careers, business and teaching, always loved to read. How did you get from your previous careers to writing?
Well, I think always. I think actually the first copy of any published work I have was in junior high school, where I wrote for the junior high newspaper at Jackson Prep. And actually, my husband and I were high school sweethearts. We met when I was 15, he was 17. But on that page, a friend's mother sent me this years later. There's a letter to the editor from Mark on there. They misspell his name. They put an E on the end of our name, which we don't have. But I just thought how ironic that years later we would fall in love. We didn't know each other at the time.
Oh.
But in business, I was a marketing major at Mississippi State University and worked the first almost 15 years of my adult life in corporate communications and
Okay.
PR. My father is a retired pediatric dentist, and I worked 9 years for his practice.
Mhm.
And I did, I guess, in-house marketing, like letters to patients of records, but I also wrote curriculum for grades K through 4 that I took into the schools about dental health. So I was writing there.
Okay.
And then I left there to come home for a while, and then I got back into business at what was then the Metro Jackson Chamber of Commerce,
Mhm.
and had to produce publications like the annual report,
Mhm.
various publications, and did writing. We also had a newsletter we put out, so I
Mhm.
administered that. And then in 1996, I entered the world of education. My mother had been was a first grade teacher for years and years. Love that. I just do not enjoy that age student. And when I worked for Dad's practice, I ended up writing curriculum for junior high students. I had a fifth grade young girl come up to me one day and tell me that she used smokeless tobacco. And
Wow.
I was just horrified. I think in many ways I'm the sheltered life of America. I'm
Uh-huh.
just, anyway, but it got me to doing a lot of research. And at
Mhm.
that time, this was in the late 80s, the average starting user age for smokeless tobacco was maybe 10 or 11,
So she was right at
especially
that age.
In
Wow.
Mississippi. So I started writing programming for junior high students. And
Mhm.
so by the time I finished those 2 years and had left that job, when I thought about teaching, I thought that's where I want to go. Most people would say, "You are nuts," to work with that age.
Uh-huh.
It can be an awkward age, but it's a
Yeah.
sweet age. You're just
Yeah.
right on the cusp of a lot of good things ahead.
Yeah. Very cool. So you taught at prep for how many years?
I was at Jackson Prep for 18 years.
Okay.
I taught at Hines Community College for 2 years, and then I finished up at Madison Regional Academy.
Okay.
But
Gotcha.
I was a history major.
Mhm.
During that time at prep, I went back and got a master's in social science at Mississippi College that was a dual degree in history and criminal justice. So I
Okay.
ended up teaching that on the college level. I'm a law and order junkie. As I told my students, I have no work experience in law enforcement or
Uh-huh.
police work, but I found some great people that
Yeah.
were rock stars in their fields, and
Uh-huh.
they would be part of my curriculum and tell people really, what was the lowdown about how do
Yeah.
you do this job in real
Yeah.
life. So that was
Okay.
fun.
Yeah.
But again, with the teaching all those years, I mean, certainly I had a published textbook. Never written my own textbook, but um, I don't remember really getting a lot of materials from those publishers. I produced all my own tests, quizzes,
Mm.
handout assignments, and then there were several classes that I wrote. You mentioned one at Hitler's Persuasive Powers, but I
Mhm.
also wrote a terrorism class for juniors and seniors
Mm.
based on some of my graduate work, and
Mm.
that is the most fascinating topic I've ever discussed
Mm.
is terrorism. It's also,
Wow.
I talk real big and bad. If I ever met one, I'd be in the corner. I'm sure in the fetal position,
Yeah.
but it is a fascinating topic.
Yeah.
And then I wrote a medical military class
Wow.
about 9 wars America's been a part of and what were the medical advancements that came out of those. So anyway, all that to say, writing's been a part. But 2003, while I was at prep, is when the idea for the Timothy House Chronicles came to me.
Okay.
I just remember sitting in my room. It was a free period, and I'd had these thoughts. Abby Richardson is the woman that's the main character in the trilogy, and she, like I was at the time, is a teacher.
Mhm.
But she just came to me one
Mhm.
day, and she wouldn't leave my head. And it wasn't like doo 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 doo. I didn't hear anything,
Yeah.
but she just was very insistent.
Mhm.
And what I've learned about writing fiction, you're either character driven or you're plot driven as a
Mhm.
writer. Some writers, I know, like I've read that John Grisham takes index cards and kind of writes out his plot sequence and
Mhm.
puts it on a board and follows it. I don't know if he still writes that way, but I
Mhm.
remember a long ago article I read about his work. But mine is character driven.
Mhm.
But she came to my head and she wouldn't leave. And so I think in those first months, I started writing just scenes as they came to
Mhm.
me, and then wrote an outline for the story to develop. And those three titles have stayed the same. That's 3 years ago.
Wow.
Abandon Not My Soul is the first one. Through a Dark Valley is book 2, and then Higher Ground is the
Yeah.
swan song
Yeah. Okay,
at the
so give
end.
it briefly what the premise is of this trilogy.
Um, that life can knock you down, and it can be very dark. And even as a Christian,
Mhm.
God does not promise us a bed of roses or a
Mhm.
happy ever after. He promises His faithfulness and His presence. But Abby, when you meet her, it's several years after the death of her husband, and she's learned out some horrible things about him. Basically, he embezzled all the savings that they had put aside for their son's college fund
Mm.
and stolen all their money, and also embezzled from his law firm. And she doesn't find this out until after his death. And
Yeah.
then 4 years later, when book one opens, she's still reeling.
Mm.
And so I remember an early editor writing a note in the margin on the manuscript before it went to publication and said, "Why is she still stuck in this?" And I thought, you've never had a really hard time in your life.
Well,
For,
yeah.
for some people, it just takes a long time.
Mhm.
Anyway, but book one is about her learning to trust God, and start to dip her toe into trusting, especially men again. There's a character, Keith Halliday, that's introduced.
Mhm.
And she's also dissatisfied with her teaching job. She has a son, Drew, that's a college age student, but he had suffered a lot of emotional abuse from his dad.
Mm.
And so that sets the scene. Some friends introduce her to Timothy House for a summer program called Camp Forever. It was just like a volunteer week. So she does that in book one and is very intrigued. And in book two, she will join the faculty.
Mhm.
She's still working through a lot of this sort of emotional trauma that she'd suffered. But there are two characters, Chloe Minton and Deshawn Matthews, that are introduced. Chloe is from book one, but she is enlarged in book two. But Deshawn appears in book two. It's an older foster care child,
Mhm.
and their troubles. Keith has lost his family due to a drunk driver. His wife and two children were killed, burned up in a car wreck.
Good grief.
And so he's still obviously reeling from
Yeah.
that. I don't know that you would ever get over that kind of
No.
trauma and loss. But anyway, that will be her love interest. And then
Mhm.
book three is sort of the culmination.
Mhm.
They both end up at Timothy House. Timothy House is a made up place in my head,
Mhm.
but yet it does mirror some places that I've known about in my life. Honeywood School in South
Mhm.
Mississippi, French Camp Academy up the Trace, and then some of it, and also the Black Mountain Home in Black Mountain, North Carolina. I think it's for children, families, maybe, but great places that are foster care facilities come
Mhm.
alongside families and
Yeah.
children.
Yeah, and another of those here locally is Sunnybrook. I know they
It is, and I have not been as involved with their school model,
Mhm.
but Ron Veazey is a good friend there, but also their Sunnybrook Cares program, which Shay and Philip Carter run, I've been involved with over the years. But it's a wonderful support program for foster families. But what was meant a lot to me in books two and three was at the end of the book, I put what I called a make a difference page.
Mhm.
And basically, there's just a disclaimer at the top that just said, this story is straight out of my head. However, there are places like this. Weir's
Yeah.
Valley Ranch was the other in Sevierville, Tennessee,
Mm.
that really mirror this school that came to life through this series. And if you'd love to partner with them, here's how you can do that. And it just provides their information. But that's meant a lot to kind of give a shout out, but also hopefully bring some attention to these great programs um,
Yeah.
that help so many children that have, I just had a lot of rough knocks.
Mhm.
This June, you can change a child's future. Too many young people age out of foster care in Mississippi without the skills or support they need to live independently. At Sunnybrook, we help youth ages 14 to 21 build real-world skills and more. Join us for the second annual Fostering Hope 5K on Saturday, June 6th at 8 a.m. Register today at sunnybrookms.org/Fostering Hope 5K. Your steps give hope.
So you wrote the first book, Abandon Not My Soul, and I think you kind of took a break and did some of your nonfiction stuff before book two. You kind of have interspersed the fiction and the
Yes,
nonfiction. Um,
yes, I have.
have you had like kind of the outline of the plot in your head the whole time for all three books?
I have,
Okay.
and I also made extensive notes like character development. I wrote rules for the school,
Mhm.
kind of their mission. There was all that got produced with book one. But I started Abandon Not My Soul in 2003. I finished it in 2012, or it was published. I think
Yeah.
in '09 is when I actually finished the first draft of the manuscript. And I knocked on doors for agents and publishers, and nobody would pay me the time of day. And an agent wrote back. It was a very polite no, but it was also encouraging. Like, these are some things where your story really falls short, and I knew that going into the ball game because I am very self-taught. But I worked on correcting those things, and then I decided to self-publish in 2012 with iUniverse, which was a great experience at the time. I had a really great editor that helped me, again, with point of view, with voice, some of those character development items that to me helped me sort of find a thread that I ended up weaving through all the books. So I'm forever, the lady would never give me her full name. It was Diana S., is how she's acknowledged in the book. But I'm forever grateful to her, wherever she is, because she really made me. I can still remember sitting at my dining room table and getting the manuscript and in track changes, and it looked like, a murder mystery, like somebody had died. There was red everywhere. And I had also paid a chunk of change for it, which I was glad to do. I was in my late 30s at the time. I was way past college. I mean, I had not gone to graduate school. I did that when I was almost 50. Discovered that old dogs can learn new tricks. But I thought, this is my investment in myself. And I'm not going back and getting a master's of fine arts. So I decided, I looked at that and cried a minute and then dried my tears. But I thought, well, I got 3 options. One is I could just ignore everything she's just told me. And that means I've just had all this money and I've lit fire to it in a trash can. And that's probably not a really smart plan. Or 2, I can take every change that she's given me, and I feel like I lose me in the story, which I'm not willing to do. And so the middle ground was to take what I felt like I could give on and then develop a list of what I've come to refer to as non-negotiables. And that's my term for either in my personal life or in my writing life, things I'm not going to change. Even if the world's greatest writer were across the desk, I feel very strongly that writers know better than anyone else what they're trying to say. And so I think you owe it to yourself as a writer to stay true to that. At the same time, I think you have to be teachable. I think you have to lay for me, big fat ego aside, because that gets in the way. That was one of my early prayers about Abandon Not My Soul. And it was very exciting, to hold that book. It had been in my head for so long to hold it, but that was my prayer all the time. Lord, if this is something you have put on my heart and you can use, then bring it to reality. But if this is my big ego or some trip I'm on to promote myself, then just squash it. And the fact that I have 3 books now on the shelf in that series, leads me to believe. I mean, I still want to be mindful of me, that I don't want to get in the way of what he has planned for me, but that he has a purpose. That he has a purpose. But all that to say, 2012 was when that was published. I did a re-release with the same company in 2015 to tweak something in there. Not a reader would probably never have noticed that it was bothering me, and so I changed it. And then I was still teaching, and 2010 was when I was in graduate school, or when I graduated. But my mother took me on a trip to Europe as a celebration, for finishing that milestone in my life. And on that trip, I met a woman from Lyons, Kansas, Jean Binky, who ended up being Mildred Jansen's husband's cousin. And so she was between my mother and me in age, or is. But we just all palled around, Mom and I and Jean, on that trip. And when the trip ended, we kept in touch. In the 10 years after that, basically about 9.5, as my books took off, or as they came into publication, I would send them to Jean, so she knew I was a writer. But in early 2019, Mildred's family, it really encouraged her to be more purposeful with her story. And so she had written out about a 4,100 word account of her experience. And then in the fall of 2019 is when they called me, again, based on Jean's recommendation. So just, usually when people ask me, how did you meet Mildred? My short answer is God. But that needs more explanation.
But so Mildred is, she was essentially a refugee who was driven from her home.
She was. Her story is a little different in that it is a Gentile account. She was born in this country in 1929 in Great Bend, Kansas, to German immigrant parents who had come about 4 or 5 years earlier.
Okay.
And then within 6 months of her birth, she moved back to Germany because her father got a letter. His mother had died, and his dad needed him, Fritz, her father, to run the family farm. So she's about 6 months old on the steamer home. 2 years later, a little brother's born. But they lived way out in a rural area. Rodock was the name of the little town where they lived. I want to say about 600 people, so tiny. And I really think that's part of what saved them. But then the war came. But her story starts February the 1st of 1945, that last spring of the war, when the Russians are coming through Germany, and they knock down the door of her family farm and take her family hostage and all the people in their little town and start moving them east toward Poland. And so her father is taken. I won't spoil it for readers, but he disappears. She is sent to work maybe close to a month in a Russian internment camp, washing laundry for the Russian army. And then close to late April of 45, I think when the Russians are about to move into Berlin, the camp is free. They're basically said, you can leave. We're checking out, going on to Berlin. And she miraculously finds her brother. I mean, she had absolutely no idea where she was. And there's so many God moments in her story, but they eventually make it back to her home. But once they are there, and the home's been just ruined, it also had been used as a laundry facility. But they find, still hidden under the basement floor, you can tell where the Russians tried to dig it up. They just never, I just feel like an angel maybe stood guard. But they find a cache of valuables that her father had hidden. And among those is her American birth certificate.
Good grief.
Now, you and I in the present age in 2026 would never even think of taking a trip out. I mean, we could not take a trip beyond the borders of this country without our American passport that signifies who we are and that we're American citizens and we're documented. But that was just a different time. And so all she knows is, and her birth had never been a secret to her, but it just didn't have the portent that it does in this day and age. But anyway, her mother eventually sends her to Berlin to live with relatives, and the cousin works for the American consulate, another God moment. And then once they discover, when she presents that paper, you know, everything goes nuts, and a series of events that will bring her back to the United States.
Yeah.
It's amazing. She's 97 years old, still living very happily. She is the most amazing lady I think I've ever met.
Yeah. Well, in reading her story, I just remember being amazed by her character and her pluck and her courage, and she just had sort of a straightforward, positive attitude that is so lacking in people today who haven't been through half of what she's been through.
And she does. And to me, I mean, you know, interviewing her in all the years I've known her now, I don't think she would say this about herself, but I just think at some point in her young life during those traumas between that spring of 45 and when she maybe 53, when her mother comes stateside and her brother, that she was going to choose joy rather than despair every day. And that's, to me, the greater truth in that book is you and I have a choice every day when we get up, even before we put our feet on the floor. Am I going to be bitter, or am I going to be better? And so, and I generally by nature am a glass half full girl. And so, you know, and Mildred is that way too. And so it just, you know, it was a great delight to get to tell her story.
But now your publisher for that book with Mildred, Sunbury Press, is now your publisher for the remaining books of Timothy House, correct? They
are. And that relationship has just been one of the great delights of my life. Lawrence Knorr is the publisher, but has a very talented team. We reached out when we were writing that book. I started that book in the fall of 2019 and finished it actually on Mildred's 91st birthday in the spring of 2020, 4 months later. I mean, I knew the clock was ticking. Again, she's in excellent shape, but I thought, we don't have a lot of time. We got to get this done. But at the time, I did not have an agent, and so we were looking for publishers that accepted agented submissions, meaning I, as the author, could just knock on their door, and they also accepted simultaneous submissions, meaning I could do almost like a gunshot approach. And so we sent the manuscript to 3 different publishers. Sunbury was the first one we heard from, and we took it, and it's been a great relationship.
Yeah.
And so anyway, that book came out in November of 2020, and the spring of 21, I wrote to Lawrence, my publisher, and just said, "Hey, I got a question. Here's this book that I published," and kind of gave him the backstory on the trilogy.
Mm-hmm.
Books 2 and 3 were in my head
Mm-hmm.
and on notes of paper, scraps of paper, but I had nothing really started on them. But I just said, "Do you ever re-release I can't even speak, previously published works?" And he said, "Sure, send me the manuscript." So I sent him book 1, and he wrote back about 3 weeks later and sent me a 3-book contract.
Oh, wow.
And so
Yay.
that was exciting.
Yes.
So I think March of 22, Abandon Not My Soul came out. And then in the midst of that, I usually have about 2 or 3 books going on my desk at a time. And so finished that veteran suicide memoir in 23. And then as soon as that was in the hopper, started working on Through a Dark Valley, which is book 2, that came out in 2024, and then finished Higher Ground last summer of 25, and it was released early 26.
You are just always busy. Yeah, you always have multiple books going. And I'm like, people think I'm crazy for reading multiple books at the same time. You are writing multiple books at the same time.
It's probably not a good plan, but it has worked so far for me.
Yeah,
Just try to keep the plates spinning on the different sticks,
Yeah. So, as a writer, how has God shown up in these stories, fiction, nonfiction, all of the above? How has he shown up in ways that has surprised you?
I think the main way for me as a writer, sort of mechanically, is he has led me to friendships with writers that to me are in the NFL of writing. I'm still in the Pee Wee League. But people that have been so kind, writers like Ken Geyer, Troy Karn, even Alan Levi, who I've had the chance to meet recently, but his book, Theo of Golden, but that have modeled for me what, especially as believers, what does that writing life look like? Also, just that we live in this age of technology. While technology is the bane of my existence, it is very frustrating to me. I mean, I remember life before computers, and it's like, what is the big deal? We just got along wonderfully. But yet, it does allow me to travel or to take a class or to listen to a podcast or an interview with a writer that I would never be able to meet on my own.
Yeah.
So God, for me, has provided that. There are also times when I'm at my desk, I can remember several scenes. There's a scene in Abandon Not My Soul near the end of the book where Keith is basically coming clean about the fact that he's fallen for Abby, and he shows up very late at night at her house, very unexpectedly, and she's just totally bumfuzzled by the whole thing and is not very receptive to this idea. That was not on her radar or in her plan. But I can vividly remember just the presence of the Lord the night I wrote that chapter. There's a scene in book 2, Through a Dark Valley, I think it's book 2, where Chloe, one of the foster children, she's a 10-year-old, is at summer camp, and there's a girl in her cabin that basically gets in a fight with her, and their fists thrown and ugly words said, and this little girl cowers in the corner. But again, this presence, a really strong presence of him being with me. So times like that, I have a friend that calls it a creative download. Also, when you just sit down to write something difficult and you're like, I cannot do this. And then you finish 3 or 4 hours and it's like, but I did, but God did, not me.
Yeah.
And I think that's the main thing about my writing is I in and of myself have zero to say, but I do believe if I will lay myself aside that he has some things he would like to say through me, and I pray that's what he's done through my writing.
So we love to talk about new works and old works on this show, classics and contemporary. Are there any, I don't know, are there any classics that come to mind for you when you think about the Timothy House Chronicles or just your work in general that maybe like, okay, if you like Sherye's work, also read this?
Well, I'm saying these because they have inspired me, not in any way to compare myself to, but
Yeah.
Alan Levi's new hit, Theo of Golden, it's been out a couple of years.
Yeah.
It was a self-published work, and it was picked up by Simon and Schuster
Which
last
is
fall,
just so awesome.
and has been #1 on the New York Times bestseller list this spring. But it's a beautiful, beautiful book, and it's timeless. He's a fabulous writer, but to me, the book mines a lot of Alan's previous life experiences as an attorney, as a judge. I think he has a master's in Scottish literature.
He's a songwriter.
Yeah, as a songwriter, had a 20-year career. And so you see his love of or passion for different subjects. But also, I love the way, too, that he takes scriptural premises, words really straight out of the Bible, but doesn't quote them and doesn't give you the Bible reference. It's just woven in a conversation. And if you are a believer, you get it. But if you're not, it's not like whacking a dog on the edge of its nose with a rolled up newspaper kind of a thing.
Yeah.
It's not offensive. I don't remember the attribution for this quote, but somebody said, I remember reading or hearing long ago, don't worry about being offensive for Jesus. He's offensive enough in his own right. I mean, a lot of people don't like to hear what he has to say. I love the Mitford series by Jan Karen, but again, these are masters at their craft. But that type of, I grew up in the Episcopal Church, and so I love Father Tim and the Mitford series and a lot of those prayers and parts of the liturgy that Jan Karen writes about. I can still quote some of those from memory, from sitting in the pew and do that. And I loved Father Tim's prayer life. I think that was maybe something, I don't know if I consciously copied that, but that is one thing that is a theme through the Timothy House Chronicles, are prayers that either Abby and other characters say aloud or you hear it in their inner voice. Again, conversation with. But those would be two people, and certainly C.S. Lewis has been a big encouragement. My favorite of his is The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I think I definitely remember reading as a child.
Another one that I didn't read till I was an adult. I'm rediscovering all these children's books as an adult sometimes.
Right.
And, like The Secret Garden, that's one I read last year.
Yes.
Like, come on, Katie, what you been doing?
No, but there is so much I did not read in my older years. I'm trying to do the same thing. In fact, I have a whole shelf of Lewis on my bookshelf in my writing study, because I tell friends that come in there, I'm a poser. There are very few of these that I have read. But I have had the great fortune there. The Montreat College in Montreat, North Carolina, has sponsored several fabulous Lewis seminars over the past, say, 5 or 7 years that I've been privileged to attend. And the Wade Center at Wheaton College in Wheaton, Illinois, right outside of Chicago, is the largest repository, I think I'm saying this correctly, for Lewis's work. And they have a podcast. In fact, I was listening to it this morning, getting dressed and ready to come see you. But
I need to put that in my queue.
That's a wonderful, again, using technology to train ourselves.
Yeah, very cool. What are you reading right now?
That's a good idea. A good question, rather. The Bible, I'm really not reading anything right now. Probably notes on work underway on my desk and the current manuscript under submission. So really not anything right now. But the last one I did finish was Theo of Golden, that again was fabulous.
Yeah.
I was given a great book by a friend the other day, and I can't even recall the title. That's terrible.
Is that pretty typical for you? Like when you're in writing mode, it's really hard to break away and read for pleasure?
Yes. Yeah. And I'm a morning person by nature, so I generally get up at 5. Ooh. And the world's still asleep. When I really didn't start writing till my children were in college, so it was past the point of somebody calling mama or whatever. Yeah. But Mark might be saying, Sherye, can you help me with this? Yeah. But I love the morning. But usually by the time I get to where it's bedtime and I want to, lay down, a lot of people read at night. If I'm under the covers and I read about 2 words, I'm gone. Yeah. So that's not a good time for me. But I am working on a new book, or just some ideas, some research for one. Still working on the title. But basically this premise that everybody goes through hard times, and what do you do when you hit what I call a brick wall in life? Are you going to curl up in the corner? That's could do that. That's probably not a good life plan
Mm-hmm.
for making forward progress or how you're going to get through this or over this or around this brick wall.
Yeah.
So I have a bag full of books next to my desk that I
Yay.
will start into. I really hadn't done
So is this fiction or nonfiction?
that. Nonfiction.
Okay. Very cool.
Nonfiction. And though I loved writing the Timothy House Chronicles, I was kind of laughing to myself getting ready for today because I really don't consider myself a fiction writer.
Uh-huh.
Um, but I really wanted to see this through. And so I'm
Yeah.
very grateful to the Lord that I was able to do this. I think part of writing this series was a dare I made to myself. I can do this.
Yeah.
And then just seeing if I could, although it took 23 years from that fall of 2003 when Abby first came to my mind to this January when book 3 came out.
Yeah. But that's awesome. I mean, you got a 3-book contract and
Yes.
they're out there on the shelves.
Right.
So where can people buy the Timothy House Chronicles?
Sunburypress.com is my publisher. It's sunburypress.com. All my books are there. Lemuria has most of them. I need to actually call them about Higher Ground. It's been such a busy spring. I need to get that in their inventory. And then Amazon.com. You can there.
All right. And Sherye is spelled Sherye, by the way. So y'all can find Sherye Green and the Timothy House. But Sherye, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thanks, Katie. It's just been a treasure to be with you. And thanks for all you do to inspire writers and believers alike.
Well, thanks.
Hey y'all, this episode of Oh My Word with Katie is sponsored by Sunnybrook. Sunnybrook is located right here in Ridgeland, Mississippi, and they help young people who are aging out of the foster system. They do everything from driver's ed to counseling to providing respite care for foster families. And they've been a great friend of the podcast and of Mississippi Christian Living Magazine, which is my day job. But you can find out more about Sunnybrook and how you can get involved at sunnybrookms.org. And until next time, happy reading.